straight into the chat.
Sure.
Hello and welcome to the Grad Ireland Graduate Careers Fair, to the first of today's seminars. I'm delighted to welcome you here to this seminar on managing your career during times of uncertainty. And I think it's pretty clear that it doesn't get much more uncertain than the times that we're currently living in. And we're here to provide you with some practical advice and tips from those within the industry who are working with students and graduates. And without further ado, I suppose I'd like to introduce you to our panel today. I would like to welcome Breffney O'Sullivan. Breffney is the Student and Graduate Recruitment Manager for Ericsson Ireland. And Tom Tully. Tom Tully is the Industry Talent Manager for Board BIA. So representatives of two of our of our strongest sectors, I suppose it's fair to say, technology and food. And like all industries, I suppose they're seeing 2020 as a year that they'll probably never forget for many, many reasons. And so I suppose, guys, Breffney, I'll start with yourself, if that's okay. Thanks for joining us here today. Really do appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
You know, as I just said, you're in one of the sectors which is, you know, generally understood to be a growing sector, a sector which is robust, a sector which, in which, you know, jobs seem to be increasing year on year. Yet I'm sure you've had your challenges this year too. Could you explain to me how, you know, 2020 has kind of impacted your job in terms of how you work with students and graduates?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's actually what's happened with us specifically has been very unexpected, in the sense that while obviously across various different industries, the number of opportunities for graduates can in some places be growing, in some places be shrinking, because we're living in such a dynamic time where we don't know what next week is going to bring, leave alone the next few years. So what's actually happened for us is that I've been alarmingly busy for the last few months. I'm very happy to say, where it looks as though the 2020 for us, we're going to take in more graduates than we have any other year. So in terms of interacting with students, the most sort of common thing that comes across is there's an awful lot of uncertainty. And for a number of people, they may necessarily have had, they may have secured a role earlier in the year. Unfortunately, it was cancelled due to various things. That's happened rather a lot. So our thing is to just make sure that the experience for them, especially with the market being as it is, just make it as smooth as possible, and more than that, just be as transparent as possible, so they have as much information they could possibly need as regards what they're sort of engaging with, be that, say, interviews or assessments or things like that. So that's at least what we're trying to do with it.
Thanks very much, Breffney. Tom, from your own perspective, how has 2020 been in terms of your, how you've been working with students and graduates, and what the plans are?
Yeah, so well, I guess we have a good few students on our books. We not only work with grads, but we work with people who are a little older in career as well on executive development. So we have a suite of programs called the Board BIA Talent Academy, and we run it in association with two universities, UCD Smurfit and DCU Business School. And we've been trying to course correct the current students we have across all our programs, who many of them were abroad. So when COVID hit, the proverbial hit the fan, and obviously student safety was our primary concern. So it was getting people back home, and then when things started to ease up, getting them back out. But it was pretty hairy during March, I would say, at the back end of March and April as well. And I think stressful, particularly for the students, obviously, as well. And as Breffney said, a lot of uncertainty. But I guess for myself and for the crew that I have, my mantra has been, this too will pass. We've faced a lot of things in the past, and hopefully this will pass in the very near future as well. So while there is uncertainty, I think probably what I'm trying to advocate to our students is to be patient and try and ride it out over the next year or two, because opportunities will arise again.
And Tom, I suppose, and as you've said there, hopefully this too will pass. But as graduates and students will say, but yeah, it's happening on my watch, at my time, when I was looking forward to starting my career, and I had my career plans maybe laid out to a certain extent. What are some of the tips or tricks or tactics that you would advise students and graduates to maybe look towards as they try to adapt to this? When they may have had an internship deferred or a graduate program delayed, how can they make practical steps to start their career?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's become somewhat of a cliche, but it is a truism at the same time that you got to constantly keep learning. And people never will have had as much access to self-development learning opportunities as they have right now. There's so many different programs online, everything from Udemy and you name it, that you can actually just have access to at your fingertips. And I think people will really need to take that opportunity now to grow themselves and to also start looking at, well, what are the skills that are, no matter what the opportunity or the future looks like in the next few years, are going to be usable across whatever role they end up in. And you hear about transferable skills all the time, but they are transferable for a reason. Those key skills around being able to work with people, social and emotional intelligence. They're really, really important. The other thing then that can't be underestimated, and it's a difficult one to practice in this time, but I would ask people to look at it maybe as they look at their own personal growth, is ability to deal with stress. Because if you're ambitious, you'll ultimately want to go to as senior a role as you can in the future. And stress management is key to that. If you look at anyone who's senior, they're always fairly good at operating under stressful situations. So I think using this, we'll never have as good an opportunity to look inward and do some self-development work. So you may as well use this time effectively in that regard.
Thanks for that, Tom. And that's indeed is good advice, and we've heard it through some other sessions as well. And definitely, if someone is fortunate enough to be able to still start their graduate role, as you should have so many starting with Ericsson, which is always good to hear, they're starting in a very different place than what they would probably have anticipated. You would probably have, large onboarding sessions. You'd have meetups. You'd have all sorts of different, structures that make up your own graduate recruitment process. And as Tom has alluded to there, that they will need to draw upon other strengths, emotional intelligence, resilience, dealing with setbacks. What's your own thoughts on, how a student, if they are fortunate enough to be starting a graduate position, how can they best adapt and draw upon some of those traits that Tom mentioned there?
I think that it's very much depends on the individuals, because everyone kind of knows how their own brain works and how they
Sure.
process everything emotionally and things like that. As far as sort of general advice on that with each individual one, I think that there's especially when it comes to stress management, the biggest thing to bear in mind is that there's only so much about the parameters of the situation that you're in that you have influence over or that you can change. So the sooner, at least for myself, more so sort of on a personal and professional basis in terms of being able to look after that balance, is that if there's something that's out of your control, it's best if you try and compartmentalize it and not worry too much about it. So you only have so much agency and only so much authority in terms of what you can do. So if the situation in front of you is very dynamic, it's brand new, it's all very scary, you thought you're going to be going in to be working in an office, maybe starting remotely for the first few months, and it's all very self-directed, it's all very new. But the key thing to bear in mind is that it's all new to everybody to a large extent. So that means that more so than any other time, what I would probably advise is for everyone to take a look at what it is that they're doing in very much in the moment, rather than over a long-term thing. So not think too much about consequences, but instead try and think about, okay, so today I have to do this. This is the way I have to do it. I don't quite know. Who else would know? Because the biggest strength that we have at the moment, fundamentally, much has been said pretty much everywhere, is each other. So if you have someone who's at exactly the same level as you, who's joining at the same thing, we've tried to keep up those interactions as much as we can through training courses, is that everyone's in the same boat. They're just at different parts of it. So everyone is always there for each other. And that if someone is having a tricky time, never ever be afraid to reach out to someone else and just say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on, can I just verbalize something, can I do X, Y, or Z? Because we have to safeguard each other from both professional and a mental health perspective as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think and indeed it's on the list of questions here to talk about the whole issue of mental health, and people, students, indeed all of us, but students and graduates who we're here talking about today, obviously worry about so many things from their own personal perspectives. Like, they haven't proven themselves in the workplace. They haven't had the opportunity to gain that experience. It's the old chicken and the egg. So Tom, what reassurances do you guys have to? I mean, I suppose career development is always so important to students. They gravitate towards employers that value their future and that value investing in them in terms of how they can develop their careers. So how has Board BIA maybe, and how are you working with your current and indeed maybe future intakes in terms of a career development plan which is being developed in a very strange time, I suppose.
Yeah, well, can I just come in very quickly on the end of a point Breffney was making
Sure.
there about the virtual side of it, actually. If we're to look at it from a positive perspective as well, you know, these guys coming into the workplace now, you know, potentially will be working quite a lot virtually, but they're not encumbered by an old model of thinking that everything had to be done face to face, and what needed to get done is best done in that way, and then getting frustrated and everything. Because essentially, probably when you guys join the workforce, it'll be very virtual and it'll just be normal for you. It's just the way we do work, you know, and it won't seem any different. And you'll become effective, and you'll make relationships, and you'll build relationships that normally would have happened face to face, but you'll have those skills straight off the bat, and you're, you know, more digitally native than most of the people you'd be interacting with when you arrive into the workplace as well. So there's those advantages as well to the current situation.
Very true.
I suppose in terms of what we're doing with our guys from a career development perspective is, you know, our graduates are actually in the phase where they're about 1 year out from graduating. So we're doing a lot of stuff that's focused on literally preparing for the next step after their time with us. You know, some will decide, and hopefully roles might arise where they could stay with us, but not for everyone. So we're preparing them all for the world of work as well, and that involves everything from how best to use social media for you know, attracting a future employer, and CV prep and interview prep as well. But then also we have we have performance development plans in place for each of the grads with their managers as well, and they're looking at each of the kind of competencies that they would need to develop before they finish on the program with us. And the final thing I'll say then is that we've given a directive to all our managers to probably over-index on communication with their grads and check-ins with their grads during this time, because our grads, and I'm sure it's been said on probably as yesterday as well, you know, the current grads are operating oftentimes in an apartment with 3 other people around a table, or 4 people, and it's wrecking their head, and it can be very tough, and so they need that frequent check-in as much as possible.
Breffney, would you like to add on that subject?
I think Tom covered that exceptionally well. I think that overall, I think that overall, just in terms of the on, if nothing else, on the digital native point that Tom made, is that this is very much a process for them, which is not quite as big of a shift, but not quite as big of a shift in terms of their ways of working. It's all very new in terms of ensuring that every sort of person who's coming in is at a particular point, or just keeping them up and just making sure they know they're involved, even if not in a physical space. That's a huge thing that we're also developing as well. And with our graduates, after the initial training that they have, they go into pre-established lines and they're assigned mentors, and then from there they're all put on very individualized sort of 6-month sort of individual training programs on different exercises. But it's also on things that are fundamentally built around the products that we design and we work on, and the software we develop. So our whole thing is to make people feel as valued as possible from day one, and to keep up as much communication as absolutely possible, much like yourself, Tom. And that's one thing that we found to be absolutely key, because if you are sitting around, especially with distractions of 3 or 4 people around you, as many people are at the moment, if in as much as being able to keep that focus and also prove value, in the sense that, well, the best way that I say this to any graduates coming into us is that, okay, so the onus was on you to get yourself to this point. Now the onus is 100% on us to give you all of the tools for you to develop. If there's a specific area you want to go in that you have a bit more interest in, or you have an aptitude towards, it's our responsibility to help you develop towards that. And it's something that you can do equally as well in a virtual capacity. And we're just trying to push as many sort of roundtable meetings and larger discussions that we can, even if it's just not necessarily around projects, more around sort of theories or directions people could go, and making sure that everyone has a voice and that everyone is listened to, because that's probably the single biggest thing we can do in terms of making people engaged and making things altogether, you know, less intimidating and an easier introduction to the world of work for any graduates coming in.
Thanks very much, Breffney. And sorry, just an aside, I forgot to mention at the start of the session, we do have some time factored in for some questions. We do have some questions coming through here, and we will do our best to cover those off with Tom and Breffney in a before the end of the session in about 5 or 10 minutes. Tom, a question we get asked a lot, even before the pandemic, is, are employers checking my social media platforms? Okay. And this is something that, we've noticed it in our own research in terms of, it has increased slightly in terms of employers do it over the years. It didn't make it as a key differentiator or not. I suppose now the world of virtual, onboarding, remote interviews, video interviews, people would say, what are some fairly standard tips and tricks and things that you would encourage a student or graduate to do in relation to their social media platforms when it comes to graduate applications?
Yeah, I guess just so that it gives some sort of solace to people, we don't do a huge trawl of potential grad social media activity. I'm a firm believer in your private life is your private life, and then is your professional life. So I guess we would use LinkedIn as a reflector of your professional life, and that's probably where we'd review outside of the CV process. I guess in terms of social media, as I said, LinkedIn, you want to put your best foot forward on. LinkedIn is an amazing research tool. People will never have, and they never have in the past had as much access to a professional network of research that's already at your fingertips. So I think have a look at people on LinkedIn who are who have a very strong profile, and look to ape that as much as possible. I think with LinkedIn as well, it's very hard as a potential graduate and just getting your foot on the ladder to stand out. And there's two ways you can do that. I guess one is to show the extracurricular experience that you've had to date, because unfortunately the reality is that so many people walk out with degrees now and masters that it's becoming de rigueur, and everyone seems to have one essentially. So you have to really go the extra mile to make yourself stand out. So that the only opportunity you have for that really is to show what have you done above and beyond what you did in college. What have been your interests? What have been the summer jobs? What are the social activities you engage in? What are the organizations that you've volunteered for? What's your social conscience like? All of these kind of things, and get that reflected in your LinkedIn profile to show that there's depth to you, essentially. Even though most of us went to college and we probably spent a good bit of time in the bar, it's to show that there was time otherwise spent as well. And then I think the other thing I would say is that try to post on LinkedIn to show that you're active as well. But when posting, try to make it somewhat informative to the person who's viewing it. So sharing something you've learned, a piece of, an article or an insightful piece of research that you've come across. The people I see using LinkedIn most effectively manage to highlight that, they're smart professional people, but here's something I've learned and it's interesting, and it actually is interesting when you read it. So I think people can utilize LinkedIn in that way as well.
Okay, Breffney, any thoughts yourself on that, and how graduates and students can, I suppose, not be too paranoid, but also, take some practical steps, as Tom just intimated there, to build their platforms in a way that appeals to recruiters like yourselves?
No, 100%. Just to echo Tom's sentiments, we also don't really engage too much in putting on a deerstalker and pretending to be Sherlock Holmes and going through everyone's social media. We tend not to do it too much. Again, we do believe private lives and professional lives should be separate. As regards using a tool like LinkedIn, as Tom said, is a tremendous resource. And as regards sort of engagements or things to make you stand out, there's various different things to build on top of that. If there's a particular sort of article that you come across in your feed, say you're following, in our case, say a particular technology, particular tool, and you come across, hey, there's this latest version of our latest build or something like that. But like, okay, share that, comment on it, give your thoughts. Again, like Tom said, show us that there's something a bit more to you. Is one of the biggest X factors that we have, even in graduate recruitment, is trying to find out who the person is beyond what their results were, and sort of beyond what their results.
Hello, Breffney. Sorry, did we lose you there for a second? Hello, Breffney. This does happen. Happened to me last week on a different session. Listen, well, just until Breffney comes back in to join us there, hopefully, which he will soon, I'm sure. Tom, I'll just put some of the questions that we'll have receiving your way, if you don't mind.
Sure.
These questions are obviously very particular to everyone who sends them in, obviously, and to address particular issues that they're having. And I know they are some of them are quite broad, but if you were to, as a student here just asked, like, if you're graduating at this time, you haven't got a job to go to yet, you're starting the whole application process, what are some of the skills that you could look on at developing in terms of, like you've mentioned before, soft skills, transferable skills, but also say if you're interested in moving into a particular area, like, your own sector, the food, the whole export market as such, what are some practical skills that you could look at start developing, both for your professional growth and for your personal growth?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about very practical skills, I guess, it's very role dependent. That's a very broad question, I would say,
Sure.
Rory. Practical is more difficult than the soft skills to look at. I mean, if I think about our roles at Board Bia, we're ambassadors for the food and drink industry, essentially, both here and abroad. And with that, then we need individuals who are smart, affable, good with people, can essentially represent Ireland and our industry very well, and can communicate strongly, have really, really strong communication skills, and can form empathy with people as well and read people. So again, while that would seem very difficult to perfect when you're not already in a job, say for example communication skills, as I mentioned earlier on, there's a plethora of courses online on communication skills. Try to practice them. Practice them on people presentation skills are never going to go out of style. Ability to be able to come across well is never going to go out of style. I think then the other skills on a more practical level that I would say is digital media skills are always going to be helpful no matter nearly what role you go into now at this stage. So digital marketing skills, if you can, again, there's courses, or if you've got friends and family who are doing stuff for a business, try to help out. If I were starting out now, and especially in the current economic climate, I'd be looking to, even if I could financially afford it, to work for free just to get experience in different areas. Because I know your point earlier, Rory, was people were thinking, well, look, this was my time. I had this big career plan. It's all very well for you to say that you're already in a job, but you kind of have to look at it as a marathon. And it's very hard. I was the same when I was coming out of college. I just wanted, I want to be, well up the ladder by the time, 4 or 5 years has passed. And it in reality doesn't really work like that.
Sure.
And the people who last the pace the longest and aren't concerned with rising up through the rungs and more concerned with just building skills are the ones that ultimately triumph. So I would say even doing unpaid stuff now is the best time, because you're not going to be able to do it when you have tons of life responsibilities. So now's the time to do it.
Okay.
So just focus on building up skills, as I said, unpaid or extracurricular, through, as I say, somebody who might have a business and you could help with them on, say, for example, digital media skills, communication skills. But again, when it comes to skills, Roy, I find that a very broad question, because it's every role is different. The final thing I would say on a practical level, which is often, it sounds really boring, but unfortunately it's just the way the world is, getting good at Excel, actually. Microsoft Excel, actually, like there's no role nowadays where you don't use that. Even the sexiest of careers use it in some way. And I'm always shocked by the amount of people that arrive, and that's a training we do, by the way, for them, it's kind of the 101. But the people who find the job easier are the ones that just already know it. So that's just a very practical one, Rory.
Thanks very much, Tom. Breffney, thanks for joining us again. Sorry we lost you there.
It was the Board Bia show there for a minute, Breffney.
We're just
I got all the plugs in I could.
We're just going through some of the questions here that some students have sent through to us, and I know just before we lost you there for a minute, you were just finishing some comments on the whole aspect of LinkedIn. And there's a question here about tips on getting to know people within a company, before you go for an interview or while you're working from home. I suppose, would you have a few brief tips on LinkedIn etiquette and that, what you should and shouldn't do when you're looking to connect with someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different approaches you can take. If you're about to start with a company, or if you're just going through a process with them from a recruitment perspective, I would always advise people to find out who the person who's looking after that particular recruitment process is, and reach out to them. Now, granted, this happens rather a lot for us, and I'm sure it happens with you, Tom, as well, where you try and get to as many different people as possible. But fundamentally, part of the reason for reaching out to a hiring manager is, first of all, to show you're human, you're real, you're more than the CV that's in our systems. That's one thing. The second thing to bear in mind with that is that it gives you the opportunity to maybe find out about more sort of cultural aspects of what the role is like, and sort of what it's more like to work on a personal basis that maybe you wouldn't necessarily see on a job spec. And it will also give you probably a little bit more information than you would normally have.
Okay.
And those are tremendous tools to have. As regards on individual teams, reach out to people in the companies and just kind of say, hi, how's it going? I'm looking for things. What's it like to work with? And the thing is, not everyone's going to respond to you, but some definitely will. I know that I've definitely done that in the past, where people have just been curious, where fundamentally, if someone has a positive experience to share, they want to share it with someone. So if you reach out to someone, chances are they'll get back to you, and they'll probably dissuade some either fears or apprehensions that you might have, and hopefully it'll be helpful.
Okay. We're getting questions coming in thick and fast now. Unfortunately, I am tight for time, but I'll try and get through a few more. And Bref, I'm going to put this one your way as well, if you don't mind. I just think maybe it's something that you would see a lot in your industry. The whole thing of upskilling and people taking time to, even gain certifications in particular platforms, particular pieces of software. Is that valuable to you when it comes to assessing an application that someone has, got a certification or a validation in a particular piece of software, or on a particular piece of technology?
It is definitely helpful from two perspectives. So first of all, any exposure to any technologies or tools that we use is always fantastic. Second thing is, it shows work ethic and it shows dedication, and that arguably counts for more. If someone has, say, several different, say, certifications through either Udemy or Coursera or one of those companies, if they've done that shows that they're willing to just go, okay, right, I want to build on this skill, I want to be better, I want to have literal certifiable proof that I have worked on this on my own time. Regardless of what those things are in, that all looks extremely positive from our perspective, because you're investing in yourself, you're investing in your skill set, and if you're willing to do that in your own free time, imagine what you'll do in professional capacity.
Okay, Tom, I'm going to throw you an awfully broad question for a short time frame to answer it, but you've shown such strength in this area so far. I'll throw you this one. It's just about transferring industries. If someone is saying, say if they've finished a course, they've just graduated, but they're not happy with the career path that they've embarked on, what are some of the questions they could maybe be asking themselves about what is my next step if I want to kind of pivot, if I want to pivot into, tech, if I want to pivot into life sciences, or, in any other area? What are some of the personal questions you should ask yourself?
One of the personal questions you should ask yourself is, am I a smart, capable person? Because if you are, you probably work in any industry, really. And the reality is that whatever you've done in college, unless the role you're going for is very specific to the training you've done in college, in general, what I've just said is what people are looking for. And when you arrive into a role, especially at a junior level, you're trained on what you need to know in that organization or in that job. That would be one of our key philosophies in Board BIA, is that we try to hire sound, smart people who we can teach everything else outside that, but you can't make somebody a good person if they don't already come with some personal values, like just natural intelligence, and as Breffney said, a work ethic, ability to roll their sleeves up. So to that person, I would say, who's thinking of change in industry, also what I'd say is, do it, because when else are you going to get a chance to do it? As I said, life just gets more complicated the further you get into it. So now is the time to do it. as long as you, I mean, don't do it blindly. I mean, have a look at what's the industry you're thinking of going into. Try to talk to people in that industry, find out what it's really like. Find out if it's something that aligns with your passions as well. But I think I'd certainly encourage people to transfer industries actually, because it does grow you as a person as well. Like I've worked across media, tech, and now food and drink, and all of them were a stretch. Like there's no doubt about it. But it actually makes you better as a person as well. So
Okay.
I advise that person to do it.
Thanks very much, Tom. Breffy, I'll just put the last question your way. It's a very specific question, and it kind of touches upon what we've talked about earlier on. And I suppose someone's just looking for a bit of reassurance that there is a stronger level of understanding on behalf of employers. Someone just basically saying here that they're living at home, they don't have a proper work environment, they're doing job interviews, and they're kind of concerned as to what the impression that their perhaps confined conditions will portray to an interviewer. But they're saying as soon as they get a job, they're looking to move out to a more a more work friendly space. I suppose that there is. Would you be able to say to that person that there is a level of understanding now amongst interviewers as to what people's personal circumstances may be, and of course how they can change once you have a job?
Oh, 100%. There's that fundamental understanding both through an interview process with any new candidates coming in, if they're interviewing, or even just people in, just fulfilling their regular roles as they would normally just at home. I have a green screen behind me at the moment.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
Which does definitely help. But the thing is, in my regular meetings, I don't have this up. I have the room that I'm in with a couch and television on the wall. But the thing is, the general expectation that we have is that we know that in ideal circumstances, we would obviously be in a room and be in a professional context, but we don't have that option. So therefore, our concern at the very least is that we're not too worried about where it is that you're doing something or what's going on in the background or anything like that. It's more that you're here. We're here to pitch a role for you, and you are here to pitch yourself to fulfill that role. So that's what the concentration is. So my main thing that I'd say on that is I wouldn't necessarily be too worried. It's not what we're focusing on, and we know that if you want to move to a more professional background or more sort of a professional backdrop, more specifically, when you take up the role, that's absolutely fine, but it's by no means a prerequisite or an expectation.
Okay, guys, time has caught up with us, I'm afraid. Listen, thank you so much for joining us here today at the Grad Ireland Graduate Careers Fair seminar series. I'd like to thank Tom and Breffy for joining us here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, Rory.
Cheers.